Hi, I'm Ted Haftegabber, founder and producer of Live Talks Los Angeles. Thanks for joining us. Since we started over a decade ago, we have brought you hundreds of conversations with storytellers, writers, actors, musicians, humorists, chefs, and thought leaders in business and science. You can watch and hear most of these in our YouTube channel and our podcast. For details, visit livetalksla.org. And now, here's the show you've tuned in to see. We welcome Anita Diamant, Melissa Berton, and Michaela Pereira to Live Talks Los Angeles. They will discuss Anita's book, Period, End of Sentence, a new chapter in the fight for menstrual justice. Anita is a journalist and best-selling author. Her novels include The Boston Girl, The Red Tent, Good Harbor, The Last Days of Dogtown, and Day After Night, as well as the collection of essays, Pitching My Tent. Melissa Berton wrote the foreword to the book they will be discussing. She is an Academy Award-winning producer for the 2019 Best Documentary Short, Period, End of Sentence. She's a Los Angeles-based teacher, writer, and speaker, and is a founder and executive director of the PAD Project. Michaela is an award-winning journalist and host of Fox 11's daily flagship program, Good Day LA. She previously hosted a daily national show on CNN's sister station, HLN, and was host of CNN's New Day. Take it from here, Michaela.
I am so thrilled to be asked to lead a conversation today with best-selling author Anita Diamant and inspirational English teacher and Oscar-winning producer Melissa Berton about Anita's terrific new book, Period, End of Sentence, a new chapter in the fight for menstrual justice. Yay! And we're going to talk more about the book was inspired in part by the documentary short, Period of End of Sentence, which Melissa famously produced with the PAD Project team. And for those of you that don't know, I am a lifelong advocate for girls and women and believe that we can only tackle the taboo subject of menstruation, equity, and period poverty by talking about it. It's not going to go away. Let's shine a light on it. Let's discuss it. So let's dig in and let's talk frankly about periods. Let's unpack all the ways in which menstrual injustice can limit opportunities. It can erode self-confidence and even threaten lives. And more importantly, what can be done to improve the situations, not only right here in the United States, but around the globe. All right, this is such a delight. First of all, Anita, let me be the fangirl for a second. I had a chance to tell you before what a huge fan of your book, The Red Tent, I am. I tore through it. It had such a profound impact on me and so many other women. I want to ask you, when you think back 20 years ago and where we were in terms of the landscape of when the book was released, right? Around the topic of menstrual justice and menstrual celebration, it seemed like there was this resurgence. Has that kept going? Has the momentum been lost? Where do we stand?
Well, first of all, it's delightful to be here and it's delightful to talk to you and Melissa. Actually, so the Red Tent, the title of the book refers to a menstrual tent. And it was a place women would go when they menstruated, also when they had their babies and after postpartum when they were being taken care of by the other women in the tent. The book inspired a lot of individuals and organizations to name themselves the Red Tent. There are a lot of book groups called the Red Tent. There's a nail salon called the Red Tent. There was a shop in Toronto which sold female sex toys, which was called the Red Tent, and baby goods too. I mean, it was like very good. There are nonprofit organizations. There's one in Florida that works with incarcerated women and gives them a chance to meet. So the Red Tent was really not so much a menstrual tent in its impact. It was really a meeting place for women to talk to each other, feeling safe and heard and taken care of. And I'm sure some people talked about menstruation, but that was not at the center of what became actually the Red Tent movement. It was part of it, but not only.
Why do you think there is still such a shadow, such a weight of embarrassment and shame around the topic? I was actually thinking about how I have even talked to my girlfriends, right? And talked to the tribe of women that I'm a part of about menstruation and periods. Like, shorthand, Aunt Flo, that time of the month. We can't just call it what it is. We can't address it. Why does that still linger?
Well, that's our culture. And our culture tells us that this part of our biology is, to quote Melissa, icky. That menstrual blood is not like other blood, even though it is a life-giving source. You can't have human beings without menstruation. But women's bodies and women's health have been othered from the beginning of time. And we live in a culture that's who runs it. Men run it. And men have named menstruation as from ancient times in almost all the world's religions as a curse. And when it's a curse, basically, when it's considered a curse, that means that the people who bleed are cursed. So, and we absorb that. We have absorbed that, but it is changing. Because we're doing exactly this, thank you very much, because we're talking about it and we're having fun with it, and we are not ashamed of having these conversations. I just want to say, when I first started working on this book and people asked me, what are you writing about? I had to take a really deep breath, especially when I talk to men and say, well, I'm not sure you're going to want to hear about it. But after 2 weeks, I'm writing a book about menstruation. I got over it. And they were fine. They were fine.
No, well, and that's the thing. Of course they are, right? I have been spending so much time talking about normalizing these once taboo topics. They are the weight of silence, right? The weight of shame. I throw off that mantle. I refuse now, right? And I think that's why it's such a joy for me to be part of this conversation with the two of you.
Just one more thing I want to say, that menstruation is not the curse. The curse is shame.
Yeah.
That is the curse.
Yeah. Well, let's talk also, Melissa, because from the period end of sentence film, we have been shown so powerfully that the issue of period poverty looms so large, not only just because it's a difficult conversation, but in terms of global impact and understanding. It seems as though it took a veritable village to make this Academy Award-winning Netflix film. I want to talk to you about the same challenge really Anita faced, right, in writing this book at first, of like bringing up the topic, this is what we're doing, but to then pitch a project like a Netflix series like this. Talk to me about the barriers you faced. Talk to me about how you got really good at saying, well, here's the story.
Definitely. So as people listening might know, the project began with me and my high school students when we first learned about that term called period poverty, which is the lack of education about reproductive biology, lack of access to menstrual products, lack of access to clean and safe toilets. We did not know any of that. We traveled to the United Nations, to the Commission on the Status of Women. We learned about the issue. We learned about the inventor of a sanitary pad manufacturing machine. And we were ashamed by our own ignorance. We were ashamed of our own shame about our periods. I think maybe high school girls are high school young women, I should say, are at a particular age to be very proud, but at the same time, rightfully defensive about anybody wanting to put down what is a natural coming of age process. And so we learned about these things and we wanted to make a film about it. Yeah. As you said, there were many barriers on our path in doing this. First of all, we had to fundraise to make the money to send a pad making machine to our partner organization, Action India, in India, and we had to fundraise to make a film. In order to fundraise, as everybody engaged in fundraising knows, you have to be upfront and say what it is that you're raising money for.
They want to know where the money's going.
They want to know where the money is going, and this certainly caused all of us to go on an odyssey about our own shame, our own willingness to talk about periods, what that means, what that is, to our great luck and surprise, and also maybe just a larger indication of the way that the world's attitudes are going about this. We found the more we talked, the more doors opened for us. When we had completed the film and were first going on film festival circuits, we won what's called audience awards. That means that the audience votes for what film they like out of the many noble and wonderful short documentaries. And we thought, you know what? Maybe people are ready for this message. Maybe they're ready to hear it.
But don't you find that oftentimes that's the way it is? The people are ready before perhaps corporations,
Yes.
business leaders, investors are. Now, okay, so then the next natural question is, how did you two life forces encounter one another? I mean, there, I can see where the connection is, but how did that come to be?
I want to share a story that I don't think Anita knows. So as an English teacher, we read lots of books, and I also teach the Bible as literature. So I teach our ninth graders, those are 14. We teach sections of Genesis. And of course, the red tent has the story of Dinah in it in the Bible. And one of my students wrote her own retelling of that story. She had never read the red tent, but I said, oh my goodness, this is such a great short story that you wrote from a feminist perspective. You should really read this book, which I was reading for the first time too. That was just before we started filming the documentary. Then years later, after the documentary and after I was speaking with the executive director of the Feminist Majority Foundation, she said, it's like the red tent. This is an issue whose time has passed. We've got to be talking about this. Who's talking about this? And she's the one who connected me with Morgan Anthem. So that years later, after that, when I met with the team at Scribner and to start doing the book, and Binky Urban, she said, well, who could write this book? And I said, Anita Diamant? She said, I'm calling her today. So that's my backstory. And I'm just so thrilled that it worked out. I couldn't be happier.
Anita, share your perspective about
well, I got this phone call from Binky, from Amanda Urban, ICM, saying very quickly, and Amanda talks very quickly. People here talking, would you be interested in writing a book about menstruation? And I said yes, not because of the red tent in particular. I had actually written a couple of pieces of reported pieces for a local NPR station about chapati, which is a custom in a small part of rural Nepal, where women are sequestered, actually sent out from their homes when they're menstruating, because there's this fear that being under the same roof as a menstruating woman will cause the illness or death of somebody in the family. In fact, over the course of a year and a half or so, I had read 3 articles on the front page of the New York Times about women who had died in those huts. And that got me worked up. And then I heard about a local high school girl who wrote an essay for her high school newspaper, which was read by a local politician in town, who brought the issue up to the town council, and the town council voted that there should be period products in all of the municipal buildings. And I think we're the first, I live in Brookline, I think this is the first municipality that has done that. And they're in the process of installing them. Nothing happens overnight. But those 2 stories came together in my head when I got this phone call, and I said yes. And I'm so glad I said yes, because it gave me something to do during COVID. Really, it saved my life. I don't know what I would have done with myself.
Well, that works out to be a perfect segue, because let's just talk about the elephant in the room. We're sitting in 3 separate rooms in 3 different parts of the world. I'm in my office, if you'll call it that, my dressing room. You're in your homes. We are not sitting on a stage together in Los Angeles to do this talk. And in a way, it's brilliant, but it's also very much a sign of the times. And I'm very curious, Anita, maybe you can talk about when we're discussing this issue of period poverty, we talk about menstrual justice, what is the impact? And again, maybe you don't have the data, but what you've seen even anecdotally about the impact COVID has had on this matter and this topic.
Well, in terms of people's lives, and I know Melissa has worked on this and she can talk to it as well. In my own, and here in the Boston area, there were efforts to provide period products, particularly by this wonderful group run by women of color for girls of color called Love Your Menses, which is quite a title. And they put together little bags and they delivered them to girls who they knew needed them or who were requested by, for they needed these products.
Mm-hmm.
And that happened all over the place. And I think that there was a red flag went up because there is more menstrual consciousness now. And the idea that people didn't have money and they couldn't go to the store. And so people, women in particular, stepped up, and that's where Melissa takes the story.
Well, it's what women do. We are the connectors, we are the gatherers, the tribe that makes sure we are taken care of. Melissa, talk more about what you've seen over this past year.
So statistically, an organization that we work with called I Support the Girls, which is a wonderful organization that contributes bras to homeless women and also period products. And because they deliver these products, they are very good at charting numbers. And in fact, the request, and they have 4 international affiliates, but the request for period products has gone up 35% since the pandemic. That means that 35% more menstruators don't have access to a safe means to manage their periods. And at the PAD project, we're also working with school districts. So interestingly, before the pandemic, schools had passed legislation, or at least in some states, is very complicated and very different for each state. But many schools were providing free products in bathrooms. Well, COVID hit. Many people who were having to get their products at school because they couldn't afford them in their home life situation now could not get those products. So we're partnering with 3 different school districts in California, 2 in Colorado, to make sure. And in the early days of the pandemic, when people, I think you may have seen on the news where cars were driving through so that they would get food, we would also make sure where we could contribute and where people were amenable to having bags of period products so that people could have those as well. And also an indication of just how important this is. Like many nonprofits, at the PAD project, we didn't know if we were going to weather the storm of the pandemic. And as a kind of bittersweet or happy, sad thing, it turns out that, because addressing menstrual care and access is such an important issue, we find ourselves busier than ever, and people still willing, which is so kind, because I know so much is going on, but still willing to contribute to people being able to have a safe means to manage their period.
Well, in a way, I keep thinking about all of us really, we sat in such vulnerability last year, right? Really, it is true its form of what, this boogeyman under the bed was bigger than any of us had imagined. And I think when we sort of peeked our heads back out and realized that we needed to help one another, that was a way we could, right? Yes. Help our sister, help our fellow men. Even when you think about, I've seen efforts here locally to help those that are unhoused, and I see women putting together care packages of like fresh panties and feminine hygiene products. That moves me. It moves me. And Anita, I see you on the verge of saying something. Like it's powerful.
It is. There's a story in the book about a woman in Toronto who encountered a homeless person, a woman on the street, and she didn't have anything to give her. And I don't think she even had money to give her. She went home and she thought, next time this happens, I want to be ready. So she got one of her old purses and she put things in it. She put a comb and she put tissues and she put period products. And she said, next time I see somebody, I'm going to give it. And then she put it on her Facebook page, and all her girlfriends said, I'm going to do that too. So she started a nonprofit and the Period Purse. And this woman started a movement in Toronto. And today, all of the Toronto schools, middle schools and high schools, have period products in them, thanks to her and the people that worked with her. She has mobilized high school students to collect products from their families and their communities. And she has just, this one woman, encountering, seeing, and understanding the need, has had an enormous impact. She's recruited lots of people. It's not just a one-woman show, but it's her leadership, and that's incredibly inspiring to me.
Me too. And the idea that we think I'm one person, what difference can I make? We all know how powerful it starts with one. A movement starts with one. You know what it is?
You know what I really think it is? We all can relate to this, right?
Yeah.
Who hasn't gotten caught without, or had to get up in the middle of a meeting and not, excuse me. This was before, and we all know what that feels like. And to really put yourself in the shoes of somebody who's living on the street, or somebody who's in prison, or somebody who's in a refugee camp. It's a very personal, you can feel it right here, right?
Feel it here. It's a visceral feeling.
Yeah.
It brings us to the topic, because you made the very good point, Anita, earlier about the fact that this is all part of that larger umbrella that I think, and I hope and I pray fervently that there has been a sea change, a paradigm shift in the topic of women's health, right? More physicians, more decision makers, more people in the C-suites talking about the importance of focusing on and dedicating funds and resources and smart brains to the topic of women's health and equity and parity and access, right? So that brings us to things like tampon tax, legislation, even menstrual leave. Melissa, bring us up to date on what you're hearing about conversations around some of these things.
So there are great organizations who are at the forefront of really changing policy around things like taxes placed onto tampons. And there are people who can say it more correctly than I can, but I'm going to give it a try. Period Equity is the organization at the forefront of this. But basically, states, state by state in the United States, can determine what products they are going to deem as unnecessary. If they deem a product as unnecessary, then that product, whatever it may be, is subject to a sales tax, in some cases, a luxury tax. So that—
Such a luxury.
Yeah, exactly. So that in some states, tampons are taxed and pads are taxed at the highest luxury rate, whereas bingo supplies, gun club memberships, candy bars, Viagra, all sorts of things that states may not deem as essential are not taxed, while period products are. 20 states have abolished the so-called pink tax. 30 states, we're trying to get them to do it. The US is a little behind other countries, or some countries, I should say, in this, where they have done away with tampon taxes, and in some cases actually providing period products for free. Ireland,
Scotland recently.
Scotland also did away with the tampon tax. New Zealand has products in schools. So things are changing, and we still need them to change. I remember things really are changing. When I first started learning about this issue was around the time of Hurricane Katrina, so that dates it. But the people that I were talking to, the feminist organizations that I were talking to, were up in arms because the relief kits that were sent to communities suffering from the damage of Hurricane Katrina included shaving kits. So, God forbid somebody didn't have a beard, but did not include any menstrual supplies. So that's how sort of,
like backward.
What does that tell you? It tells you that men are packing those and making the choices because women we're not or certainly not in positions of authority to say, wait a minute.
And by the way, it's a further reminder, Anita, to the important, we keep saying the word representation matters, right? So if you have leaders, if you have people at the head of FEMA, people at the table at those conversations saying, what about, and don't forget to, and here's a corporate sponsor from X, Y, and Z that can provide those products.
Exactly.
Do you think in our lifetime, either of you, that we'll see the United States catch up in this way?
Well, I really have to say that Scotland is the only country so far to really make period products, to pass legislation mandating all municipalities to provide them. Nobody else has done that yet. And there are laws on books in many countries that are not enforced. So in Kenya, many years ago, a law was passed that there should be products in all schools. There are not products in all schools. But there are now a lot of women in the Congress in Kenya who have met and started making noise, and through their presence have brought this to the foreground again. And they did that as a result of a girl who was shamed in school for having a stain on her school uniform, and who left school, went home and hanged herself and died. And this became an outrage. And I have this wonderful photo in my head of something like 10 African women who were all Congress people around a table saying this can't stand. So this is where we are. Girls are still killing themselves or staying home from school because they're ashamed. And on the other hand, because there are women at the table, and because we're not as afraid anymore to talk about what's normal and good, things are changing. I really think we're at a paradigm shift.
No, I agree with you.
Yeah,
I agree with you. And to that end, I mean, Anita, Melissa, I don't want people to get it twisted. This isn't just happening overseas. If you talk about in our inner cities, in some of our urban areas, there are young brown and Black girls living in poverty that do not have access and are missing school during that time of the month when they're menstruating.
Absolutely. So 1 in 5 students, again, it's hard. So good research on this requires money. Yes. Menstruation has been lowest on the priority. Somehow we managed, thousands of years. Why do we need to devote money to something women have been taking care of all this time? But the more research that's put on this, the more things are showing what women and families have intuited all along, which is that 1 in 5 girls drops out, 1 in 10 college students does not have access to the means to manage her period, or is out of work, out of a home, so therefore doesn't have a place to be clean. So I do think that there is a paradigm shift for sure. Anita knows this story very well. It came up on our first phone call, but right after Oscar, I got so many emails, but certainly a lot of them, and one that just broke my heart was, "Thank you for making this film. This is from a young woman in Compton, California. I stuff my underwear with socks when I get my period. I can't afford anything."
Yeah.
Also, the other thing I want to say is that in addition to not affording them, there are people who get some and don't have enough. Yeah. And if you're worried that the 1 pad you have or the 2 pads you have isn't going to last you the day, if you're in school, you're distracted, you're worried,
you're not present,
you're not going to try out for the track team that day for sure. So it's got subtle results as well. It's not just staying home. It's not just dropping out. It's curtailing your attention and your intellect. So it's not fair. It's just not fair.
I'll tell you a funny upbeat thing on that just is happening for the first time to me. And I think it's partly because students know who I am, but my students do when they know about period end of sentence in the documentary and the book. However, I had to check my own, whatever you want to call it, prejudices, things. Oh, that's just an excuse. I am getting emails from my students saying, telling me their cramps are really bad. Will they please understand they're having a very hard menstruation if they can't come to class? And I'll admit that my first response is, "You're playing me."
Right. Right.
Get me. I'm not going to say no. And then I thought, I don't bat an eye or tell somebody they have to take a test if they're having a horrible migraine or if they've got the flu. They may be having horrible cramps. Lord knows I've been there. So I forget it. It's part of that paradigm shift. So I'm glad they're brave enough to say it.
Absolutely. There's a lot of things that I want to talk about. I feel like we just could be sitting here having a glass of wine and talk about this for hours at a time, because there's just so much rich stuff to mine, right, ladies? I was thinking about, Anita, in our world, when we research and do a deep dive into a topic, right? I hear this from documentarians all the time, and especially writers who say you start out with a goal, but along the way, things reveal to themselves to you, right? These discoveries, these aha moments, these real nuggets. Did anything along the way during the course of your research for the book surprise you?
There was an overall sense of surprise at how enormous this subject is. Wow. That it's not about period poverty. It's not about products. It's about our culture, and it's about education. It's about the fact that we aren't taught about this, and that means all genders. Yes. I think one of the things that was like, I've had like duh moments, which I've shared with people, that period products belong in all bathrooms like toilet paper. Yeah. It's not different. And I really was when I would say this to friends of mine who would also do this sort of forehead thing, it's like, of course, they never thought about that. Right. I remember going to an art museum, it was just before COVID struck, and there were products on the vanity in the bathroom. And I thought, wow, there are no, I'm not sure I have product. I know I don't have products on the vanity in my bathroom. What if somebody needs it? So it's a kind of, you start seeing it everywhere. And I think as people understand more about this, and you make the toilet paper comparison, yes. It's not the leap that you might have thought it was before. There's still people who are going to say, why can't you take care of it yourself? And that includes women, to say. Well, yeah. But this is what this is really about, is acknowledging women as people, as human beings who have a full right to participate in all aspects of human life, and that they deserve, they're not amenities, the necessities that will allow them to contribute and to thrive and to soar. And what I find incredibly inspiring also is the number of young people. I mean, the PAD project is a bunch of teenagers. It began, that was that energy, right? Melissa, is this incredible, what do you mean that,
That's right.
Yeah. And then they start doing things. And I said this before, we live in a time of one name wonders like Malala and Greta and Amanda and Emma. And these young women have raised issues up to the fore in a way with integrity and passion as leaders. And that's who's fixing it, slowly but surely, with help from international agencies, with help from nonprofits, with help from enlightened educational institutions and legislators too. And again, representation.
Us at their flanks, the older generation cheering them on, pushing up, being the scaffolding, if you will. Melissa, talk a little bit more about that, because it seems to me, we had it better than our mother's generation, the generation that comes after us. They're doing better than we did. Tell us about what you're seeing in these young women. Anita talked about it a little bit, of the passion, the fire, the why isn't it this way?
I suppose that is why I love teaching so much, and why, right after the Oscar excitement, everyone said, you're going to quit teaching. And I don't think I could, because I am so moved by seeing how I learn from my students and how they inspire me, because I couldn't see that, I don't need to have a code word for my period, or I shouldn't be ashamed of my period, without their eyes to sort of see that for me. Also, I continue to be touched by the sort of generational buy-in of grandmothers, mothers, fathers, grandfathers, daughters, that is in this movement for menstrual equity. Probably my favorite character in the documentary, for anyone who's seen it, is the sort of grandmother of the group of women making pads. Her name is Shabana. And she became this feminist because she was a victim of domestic violence. And now she leads and was really at the forefront, the liaison between the nonprofit that we work with in Action India and the women in the village of Katikera making the pads. And it was because of her strength too, as a person who had seen more, done more, been there, that she could inspire and motivate young people to believe in their worth. And so I love all of that. And I just think it's so key for this movement. It's so key for humanity, right? That we're going to learn and we're going to carry on.
Well, and Anita, growing beyond that, I find it super profound and powerful that you dedicate a chapter to men and menstruation, right? Like I think about in my own life that, my dad raised 5 girls with my mom. So he knew what was going on in our house, okay? 2 bathrooms, 1 for the adults, 1 for the kids, a whole lot of pads and tampons and toilet paper being used in that house, I think about my partner who has no trouble he was raised by a strong mother, talking about the fact that he'll go and buy tampons or pads for his sister or for me or for whoever. Their partner is this.
Yeah. There are a lot of very funny stories about men's cluelessness. The most famous one is Sally Ride, who was the first woman astronaut. And she was going to be in space for 10 days. And the rocket scientist came to her and said, "Is 100 tampons enough?" Okay. On the other end of that are examples of men and fathers and friends and brothers and boyfriends being wonderful, just taking care, just being human. There's a great story in the book about a cab driver in South Africa who in his cab would take kids to school back and forth. There's no bus service. And he noticed bloody tissues and stains on the back seat. And so what he did was he went and bought pads and he put them on the dashboard and he said, "Anybody who needs them, take them for free." And he told the boys who started giggling to stop it. And so he was all over television. He became a real role model of how to respond with compassion and just being a good guy. And there are dads like that too. So stories, really good stories about good guys, we need to share those. Because there needs to be a model there too, right?
Absolutely.
The modeling of that behavior is so important. It's interesting because you talk about these stories and you talk about how we're seeing even the conversation about menstruation and periods, even in pop culture, right? You think about that, it wouldn't have happened when I was a teenager. I mean, here's examples. Granted, a very graphic scene in the Borat sequel, far more relatable scenes in that terrific Netflix series, The Queen's Gambit. I think it was Netflix.
Yeah.
Even an attempt to normalize the topic and a conversation in the animated series Big Mouth. This, to me, and I'm sure it does to you, it's a shift towards more visibility. Yeah.
Well, there are more women writers, for one thing. There are more women in the writers' room. There are more women showrunners. And when I was growing up, the only time people talked about menstruation was, "Oh my God, I didn't get my period," or "Oh my God, I didn't get my period." That was either you wanted to be pregnant or you didn't want to be. That was sort of it. And then there were PMS jokes. She's on the rag and she's crazy. But today, it's really changed. And people talk about periods like it's nothing. And we have examples of 2 of the most squeamish male characters, Larry David and David Rose on Schitt's Creek. Both of them are in moments where a young girl comes into their house and they have their first period, and they both act like it's okay. They make it okay. And these are 2 squeamish, weird gentlemen, who are also, well, I'm a big Schitt's Creek fan, but it would have been unthinkable 10 years ago, I think. So there's been there's a cultural shift. Women comedians, this is a big subject for women comedians. I interviewed Kate Clinton, who I think probably broke this barrier many, many years ago. And she said, once they're advertising Viagra on television, all bets are off. This is nothing. And So we're in a different place. We are in
a different place.
in a different
You know, I mean, even think about the fact that Pantone issued a color
Yeah.
period red as part of, you know, this effort to destigmatize. But to me, it speaks to the notion of how important allyship is. I was thinking about, you know, we saw recently, sadly, a rise in anti-Asian hate, right? And I was talking to one of my Asian colleagues about the fact that the onus isn't on you and your community to fix this. It wasn't you that created this problem. To me, it's the same thing. We did not create the shame and secrecy around periods and menstruation. We can be advocates for ourselves. We can control our own narrative, but it's not up to us necessarily to fix. We need to non-menstruators need to be partnering with us in the solution.
As much as that's true, we have absorbed these messages. They are very deep inside of us. And it's still hard for someone to call in and say, I can't come in today. I have my period. I have a migraine. And we still carry this stuff around with us. So it is on, in a weird way, we have to heal ourselves.
We do.
And we have to model it, and we can't do it alone. And men have to be responsible too. But this is really deep. This is a really deep.
So to undo I think of it as stitching, almost like when you get the little tiny seam ripper and take out the stitch by stitch by stitch.
love that.
Intricate work, right?
Great
Well,
metaphor.
we're doing with the younger women by starting them out in that space, in that conversation.
Absolutely.
But for our generation and older, and even the ones that are still squeamish, how do we heal that wound?
By doing this.
Okay.
By talking about it, by having more representation in the arts, in mass media, with women and men who are comfortable with this. Advertising, I gotta say, around period products in America is very puritanical.
Can we just talk about the fact that they have a bear pooping in the forest? Advertise toilet paper.
Yep.
Yes.
And if they can do that for toilet paper, why can't there be something around?
Well, there are really great commercials in England and in all over the place. They're in Australia. They're they're funny, and they make fun of the stigma, and they make fun of the silence. And I think humor is a great tool in this, to take it down a peg and say, this is just human, and we can laugh about human stuff. Not at anyone's expense. Of course.
Never. Melissa?
They commercials for last year during the Academy Awards, which is a great place to put commercials because there's a lot of viewers. They wouldn't do a commercial for pads from Always or anything else, because that would gross out too many viewers potentially. The period blood is still always blue, you know. So
it started to change. I saw it the other day. It was pink. It wasn't red. It was not bright red. So they're inching into human. But the blue, remember the blue fluid on the pad? Nobody bleeds blue. What is that?
Well, and that's the thing that's so crazy. You know, I can't bear violence. There's so many movies and TV shows that are so incredibly bloodthirsty and bloodletting and violent. I can't really watch that stuff because of the violence. But it's amazing, Melissa, when you think about the fact that that kind of violence is completely acceptable. And in fact, it's sort of celebrated.
Absolutely.
This is also blood, and it's exactly the opposite of being celebrated.
But this is women's stuff. This is women's bodies. This is women's blood. This is not under the control of men. This is a patriarchal culture that we live in, and pretty much that's who's in charge of the world. And you know, one of the things that delighted me, you asked about surprises, was learning about indigenous cultures where periods are not hidden, where a girl's first period is in fact the cause for a celebration that includes men in the tribe, and as well as women and old and young, and boys grow up knowing exactly what's going on. And it's incredibly hopeful to me to know that human beings have ways of of taking care of this.
Yeah. You know, Melissa, I want to talk a little bit more in this. I have such a heart for young people, especially when I think, maybe it's because I think, okay, there's things I could have done better. And so I think about this world they're living in. And I think about some of the activism that you have seen. Maybe you can share with me more, and for our viewers too, who they've heard you throw around the term the pad project, and there's people that are probably tuning in that may not have necessarily gotten a full deep dive on the pad project, but light us up on some of the work that these youth activists are doing.
So they're doing so much. I mean, as Anita said, you know, Amanda Gorman, Greta, the She Had One names, and they're all of these, they see all this opportunity for change and things that they want to change. So specifically speaking, in the menstrual health movement, students are dropping off pads and tampons for homeless shelters, nearby domestic abuse shelters, foster care. They're doing it right in the courtyard in the middle of school, you know, which in my high school would not have been something that you could do. They are speaking up. They are posting on Instagram. Anita also talked about humor. Lots of funny stories about posts. We have a section at the Pad Project called Menstrual Mentions. So anytime periods are mentioned in a TV show.
Hashtag.
Yeah, exactly. So that's very fun. And I think that it's just this, I'm gonna say it, I'm not gonna hold back. I'm not gonna hide my tampon up my sleeve when I go to the restroom. I'm gonna like have it out. And again, it's a choice. It's not that every student needs to be, just like some are shyer and some are less shy, but it shouldn't be anything that somebody is going to be made fun of about. And so that's the attitude that they're taking, and I love it.
The attitude is half the battle, let's be honest.
Yes.
I want to hear more about the Menstrual Hall of Fame. Color me fascinated.
It's just the charter members. This is just beginning, right?
That's okay. Every massive movement has to have a beginning.
One of them is Lucille Clifton, who's a Black poet, who is a wonderful poet, and she wrote this beautiful poem about menstruation. I looked for poetry all over the place. This was the only really gorgeous that I could find. I mean, there were a lot of them, and there were a lot of very sentimental ones, but this is powerful. There's an illustration in the book that may be 40,000 years old, this illustration from Australia, a rock painting of two women who are hunting. They've got hunting sticks and they're bleeding. And you can see that. It's very abstract. But so 40,000 years ago, this was part of that. So the unknown artist, there's one. Judy Blume, who wrote,
yes, of course.
Are You There, God?
Are You There, God?
She's a charter member. So, they're just sort of big names, but, there are plenty more to come. Yeah. There are plenty more to come.
In fact, I have a feeling probably some of the young women slaying with Pad Project will eventually make their way into into the Hall of Fame. Okay, so let's look, forward. We've reflected a whole lot. Let's spend a couple minutes sort of looking forward in terms of what both of you see on the horizon. And it can be a brutal, clear assessment. It can also be a hopeful assessment, both for menstrual justice here stateside, right, here in the US, and then also around the globe. Take it away.
I think we will be having all states in the United States to take away. I think the pressure is going to be too great. I think in 5 years, I'm just saying, I think that we will do away with the so-called pink tax or tampon tax, because I think people will demand it. I think there will be free access to period products in schools, or at least I hope that that's the way that it continues. I think that we still have a ways to go in the prison system, where women are subject to horrible treatment that we've heard, where they're bleeding naked essentially, and they have no help or kind treatment, just basic humane treatment, even forget about kind. That's something that I certainly hope will happen, though I think that's longer in coming. The idea of period leave, of menstrual leave in the workplace, I think is controversial for good reason, because it could be a place where employers could discriminate against women because they think that they would be in the workplace less in a sanctioned way. On the other hand, I think it's important to recognize that 20% of menstruators suffer from horribly painful periods that are real and that exist, and that a woman or a menstruator is probably capable of determining for themselves whether or not they're able to go to work and would not, quote unquote, abuse that privilege. So I think that's a conversation that needs to happen in the United States, and I think will happen. My guess is that that's going to be slower than the tampon tax.
All right, Anita, what are you thinking? Where you're?
On college campuses all over this country, students are successfully lobbying for products in all the bathrooms. Because there are transgender folks who are menstruators as well. So in the boys, in the girls, and in the ungendered bathrooms as well. And for the most part, they are meeting with success. They're meeting with the administration in those colleges saying, okay, we're going to do that. Because there's a lot of support for it on campus. So I think that's an interesting development. I think, again, representation is so important. Women of color have been discriminated against in so many ways by the medical establishment, and women of color's pain has been trivialized and dismissed. And actually there was a survey of med students who actually, a sizable percentage believe that Black people didn't suffer pain as much as white people. And the medical establishment is only now starting to cop to the fact that there's systemic racism in medicine too. So again, there's a tiny fraction of Black women obstetricians and gynecologists. Yeah. So in terms of being seen by somebody who looks like you, where you can totally relax and be yourself, it doesn't happen very much. But there are some really great public Black gynecologists who are teaching online and who are speaking and are writing books. So again, there's movement. There is a long way to go. And we'll get there. And maybe it's not going to be quick, because this is ancient stuff. This is baked in to so many of the things that are attached to gender and race and poverty and all of those. It is an intersectional issue. Everyone says, oh, I don't know what that means. It means you have to have clean water. It's not enough to have pads. That doesn't do it if you have nowhere to, if you don't have a safe bathroom where to change. It doesn't do it if you don't have a place to dispose of it responsibly, or that there's a lock on the bathroom door so you don't have to worry about being pushed into. Education, so that nobody starts their period without knowing what's happening, not thinking, oh my God, I'm dying. Oh my God, I think I have cancer. And that we have stories like that. And that everybody of every gender, ooh, look at the light on my face. I like
the light. It's like the light to the grand finale.
Yeah. So that everybody knows what this means, what it is, what it isn't. Yes. And that our world will be a better place. It's part of the ongoing feminist revolution, yes. Which is like the movement for social justice, like the movement for racial justice. It has a long way to go, but is powering up.
And we have to stop along the way and acknowledge the signposts. And I think of today as one of those days where we, stop, gather our strength again, and just keep on in the struggle. So now for our last couple of minutes, I want you to each connect it to home, to the people whose attention we have today, right? Issue them a challenge, issue them a way that they can be part of the change, issue them a way that they can combat period poverty and help to end this stigma. Anita, you go first.
Well, talk about it at the dinner table. Take your daughter out for a lovely dinner when she gets her first period. And don't make it into an ooh thing, but make it into an ah thing. And that it's not such a big deal, but it's a nice thing. And you've reached a new stage in your life. And some people, want to do a little ritual. Some people want to throw a party, but make it known and make it okay, and make it okay to talk about it.
I love that. All right, Melissa.
I love that too. And I would just add, I think go to www.thepadproject.org. Have to say that, look for ways to get involved. But in my capacity as executive director for the PAD Project and getting funding, people, because we have handled our periods for so long, people tend to forget that this really is a critical issue that needs help. And to speak up for menstrual equity is to speak up against patriarchy. I talk every day to people from around the world, including the United States, including Western countries, where they tell me about women selling their bodies, especially now during the pandemic, in exchange for pads and tampons. I mean, somebody willing to, not willing to, but somebody having to do that breaks my heart. So to stand up for period equity is also to stand up for gender equity. It's a bigger thing than you might think about. It comes down to basic human rights, and that's it. Thank you so much for talking to us.
Are you kidding me? This has been incredibly gratifying. I held at the heart of this for me, my 15-year-old self. I think about her when I have this conversation with the two of you and all the other 15-year-olds that are out there, all these other women who have been struggling to feel okay with themselves and their wholeness. So I thank you both for the tremendous, important, vital, life-giving work that you're doing. Don't give up the struggle. Don't give up the fight. Keep on doing it, okay? Anita?
Thank you so much. What a great interview. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Terrific. It's amazing talking to you.
Yeah,
Thank
great.
You so
The delight
much.
was
What a
mine.
privilege.
We have
Thank
to do
you.
it.
Thank you very much, Michaela, for facilitating an important conversation. Thank you, Anita. Thank you, Melissa. In the link below, there is, or in the comment section, there's a link to the PAD Project, and you can purchase the book, Period, End of Sentence, a new chapter in the fight for menstrual justice, is available wherever books are sold. Thank you. I'd like to say, go on gently.